Hi, this is CK of CK Education. Today, I want to talk about managers and workers. I used to work in a company called Genie Industries, and there I managed an assembly line. This is early in my career. This was my second engineering job. My first one was at the Boeing company in Seattle, and Genie Industries was located in Redmond, well, still is, located in Redmond, Washington, home of Microsoft. And so when I worked there, I had learned something so important before I got there at the Boeing company, and I could sit here and talk for 3 hours about all this, but let me just try to make it really brief. I had spent 3 years with the world-renowned efficiency and productivity and quality experts from Toyota. Mr. Nakao was a man who worked for 30 years under the master Taiichi Ohno at Toyota. And he founded a worldwide consulting group, and I was working in a company, two of the companies, Boeing and Genie. And at the time, I had heard that the Shingijutsu consultants were only consulting for 3 companies in North America. And I was at 2 of those 3 companies. So I was very, very fortunate. I didn't really know how fortunate I was until a few years into it. But anyway, I had learned some very, very important things about production and processes and people and just solving problems and so forth within a process, within an organization. And I've carried these lessons with me throughout my career. It really doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't have to be a factory. It doesn't have to be manufacturing or an engineering sort of context. It could, really it could be anything. I've used it in the government. I've used it even in my education business as an entrepreneur. But these principles and concepts apply really, they're universal. Wherever people are working, you can use these concepts. But very few people know that the things, the concepts that Taiichi Ohno taught and implemented in his just-in-time Toyota production system was actually has its roots in an American named Dr. Edward Deming. And Dr. Edward Deming really was the person who trained back in the 1950s. He trained a lot of the Japanese executives and managers and engineers when Japan was at after the war, and their industry was just nothing. It was just leveled. And the difference is they were willing to listen to Dr. Edward Deming, Dr. Deming. When the Americans, because the American industry at the time was doing so well, they really didn't feel a need to get any help. But we're doing all right. And of course, this changed when Japanese manufacturing, especially Toyota, Honda, Nissan, and others, Sony and so forth, became really, really good. Their products became very high quality, and the reliability is very high, and the reputation shot. And so within a few years, really, Americans were seeing Japanese goods come in, and now we see sort of the same thing coming in from Korea with Hyundai and Kia really taking over the North American market in vehicles and so forth. So we see this trend, not really trend, we see this sort of progression and evolution of manufacturing and process improvement and so forth in different industries in different countries. But when I was at Genie, I learned something so very important. Well, I was able to implement the things that I learned that were so important. And so one of these things, and let me just touch on just a sliver of it, just really a really tiny speck of the overall thing that I learned about management philosophy. And one of those things is that managers create the environment that the workers work in, and they are responsible for the culture and the environment that they create. They are responsible for the system that exists. And yet, when something goes wrong, most managers blame the workers. And this was something that Deming really harped on, really emphasized a lot. And he always, whenever he did consulting for countless companies all over the world, when he did this, he always blamed the managers. He blamed the management. He blamed the system rather than the workers. And he made it very clear that when you are blaming the workers, all you're doing is blaming them for something that you created, okay? And so let me just give you 2 specific examples of this. One is sort of theoretical, it's a theoretical example, and one is an actual example that I encountered. So let me just give the actual example first. And the actual example was I was a production manager. I was in charge of part of the assembly line at Genie Industries. Now, if you don't know what Genie does, you've probably seen them before at construction sites and so forth. There are these big sort of blue and light gray machines that carry people, like scissor lifts and telescoping lifts and boom lifts, we call them, and so forth. You've probably seen them around, and it says Genie on there. But you could Google Genie and see what kind of equipment that they make. And so I was in charge of the RT scissor lift assembly line. RT stands for rough terrain, and so it's rough terrain scissor lift. And the scissor lift is split into three main components. And one is the sort of the chassis with the wheels on them and the tires, and the other one is the actual scissor, part of it that expands and contracts. And the third part that I was in charge of was the actual platform that people get on. And this platform is extendable and contractible, and it's got sort of this fencing, if you call it, protection, around it, and it's got the controls on it and so forth. So anyway, I was in charge of up to that point, and the assembly line was really into three different parts as well. But I was in charge of about half of the assembly line. Now, one of my workers, what happened was the chassis goes in and they install all the pipes and hoses first, and then later on it goes down, and then the scissor gets loaded on, and then finally the platform gets loaded on, and then at the very end you put all the fluids into it, and then they start it up, and then it goes off the ramp, and they drive it, and they make sure they test it, and it goes up and down and all, So this is basically, I'm making it very simple, but this is sort of what we did. And so two of my guys who were at the very start of the assembly line, they were in charge of installing the hoses and so forth. Okay, so what happened was there are probably 6 different hoses that you have to, install, and then you gotta have to tighten them, and you gotta tighten them, and you have to use a torque wrench. And when you tighten them, torque wrenches, what they do is after you tighten it a certain amount, it clicks, and that means that that's the right pressure and tension, and so it stops right after that. So you're supposed to do that for each of the hoses, the cables, the hoses, call them, not cables. So they were supposed to do that, and it goes down the assembly line. So what happened this particular day was like any other day. It went down the assembly line. It got to the very end. They filled it in with fluids. They started it up, and there's red fluid everywhere. I mean, one of the hoses sort of came off, and then just fluid went everywhere. There was red fluid all over the ground, and so we stopped the assembly line. Everybody stopped, and I called the guys who were responsible for that. Hey, get over there, run down there quickly. And the first thing we do is just remedy the situation. So let's hurry up and tighten it up and do that, and let's get that out of the way so the assembly line can keep going and clean up the mess, and then we'll figure it out. We'll figure out why it happened later. Okay, so this was one of the things, of course, we reported and we documented. We document every defect, everything that goes wrong, we document. And we don't just, we don't blame the workers. Okay, we said, so two of the guys, okay, that's okay, just get it done, and then blah, blah, blah. And they went, and then the day went. After the day was over, of course, I had meetings with my bosses. And as usual, when you have something that was a pretty big mistake, and so it was a pretty big incident, I should say. And so, of course, we had a meeting, and I had a meeting with the plant manager. And this is not something, in most companies, when something like this might happen, you might have this fear of, we did something wrong. The workers are afraid. I'm afraid. And, what if they suspend us? What if they, what? There's nothing like that. We all learned from it, because what we understood in that company was, and this is one of the reasons I went to that company, one of the things we understood in that company, and hopefully they still do, hopefully they still operate this way, is that based on Dr. Deming's teachings and based on what we learned from the Toyota production system, we know that it's a system. We have to fix the system. It's not just blaming workers. And so workers can make mistakes. This is just an everyday part of factory life. Now, you want to minimize that, of course, but it happens. And so it happened that day. So we had a meeting, and of course, the plant manager's name was Ken, and he said to me, yeah, I heard about the incident. Let's just talk about that. So what happened? I said, what happened? Who's responsible? These two guys there. Where on the assembly line? Are they working there at the front of it? And just to extract information and make sure that we understand what was going on. So at the end, so Ken says to me, the plant manager says to me, so what's sort of the countermeasure? What do we want to do to make sure that this doesn't happen again? And I said, well, we absolutely, train them, we retrain them, and we emphasize the importance of checking each of the hoses. And Ken says, is there anything else? And I said that, I'm going to have, I'll make sure every day that I emphasize that. He says, was there anything else? And he says, one of the things that we used to do, he says, when I was an engineer, is there are these metallic pens. They're kind of like Sharpies, but they're much thicker and they're totally permanent. I mean, they're permanent. You can't wipe these off. In fact, if you have a vehicle in your car, if you have like a minivan or something, and when the doors open and if you kind of look behind, sometimes you'll see these, it could be a red, it could be a green, or it could be a blue, gold, silver, white, and you'll see some marks like that, and you might think, did somebody mark my car on the inside? These are probably these marks, okay, if you've ever seen these. But a lot of manufacturing companies use them. We use them in the Boeing company to build airplanes as well. But so what he said was, let's assign them a color. Let's give them a color, and let's say it's white. And so that part of the assembly line, they all have white pens in their back pockets. And every time that they tightened a hose, and let's say there are 5 hoses, every time after you tighten it, you put a white mark right by the hose, indicating to yourself and others that you did it. And then you tighten the next one and you torque it, and then you put the white marker, you tighten the other one and you torque it, and on and on. And then, and so on and so forth. And so I said, that's a great idea, because we always want to make things visual. Now, this is another aspect of the whole Toyota production system, but maybe another video I'll get into. Visual control, we call it, but this is, it was very visual. So we did that. So we got some pens. And in fact, what I did was I went beyond, and I took that idea and I went beyond what the plant manager said. I got white pens, I got silver pens, I got gold pens, I got red pens, I got green pens, and I got all different colors. And I implemented it all across the assembly line, down the assembly line, not only in the beginning where we saw the mistake, but I thought if it could happen there, it could happen anywhere. So let's implement it. And I talked to my boss, who was in charge of the entire assembly line, and she agreed. And she said, yeah, let's do it. That sounds great. So we implemented it down the entire assembly line. So every station, every assembly line station got a different color pen. And so there were critical parts of the assembly line, parts of the processes in which we thought, after you do that, you want to mark it. I also told, when the vehicle goes from the first section to the second section of the assembly line, I told them, you want to make sure that, and I gave them certain critical elements to check for that were highly critical, okay? And so after, you have the first station, they check for those things. When it gets to the second station, before they even begin their work, I told them, I want you to check for these, and I want you to just do a quick torque check and make sure that they're all torqued properly, so we never have that mistake again. And by the way, that never, ever, ever happened again, okay? And so this is what we told the workers. And again, when we have the meeting in the morning, there's like 5:30 in the morning, by the way, we have the meetings. We say, okay, everybody, yesterday we had this and this and this incident. We're going to talk about those. We want to make sure they don't happen again. And so in station 1, again, we don't name people. We don't say like, yeah, Bob and Julio over there, they did this and this. We don't say it like that. We say in station 1, we had this incident. And so, and we're going to implement this so that it doesn't happen in any of the stations. And so everybody agreed, and we all learn from it, and we all become better. We constantly get better and constantly improve. Now, this continuous improvement is called Kaizen. And so again, I could sit for 3 hours. Literally, I've taught this for about 2 months to a group a long time ago. And I spent 3 years learning this. So I'm very passionate about it. I love this stuff. I always tell people that if I had 2 bodies, one would be doing what I'm doing now in education, and my other body would be doing this in engineering and consulting and helping companies become more efficient and deliver higher product, higher quality goods and services. And I just love this stuff, okay? So I'm very excited talking about it. And I'm talking fast, I understand. I'm trying not to make this video 30 minutes long. But so we did this, and we did it, okay? And so this is just an example of something happens, the workers make a mistake, but it's an incident because anybody can make a mistake. There's no perfect workers, and so you're going to make mistakes. So what we try to do as management try to create a better system. Okay, we don't go and blame the worker. Hey, why did you do it? I can't believe you didn't do that. How could you forget that? That really doesn't do anybody any good. All it does is it instills fear and insecurity in the worker. They don't become better workers like that. Those people didn't try to make that mistake. They didn't do it on purpose. It happens. Incidents happen. Now, there is a difference between natural mistakes and special mistakes. And again, this goes into deeper things, and I don't want to go over those right now, but Deming calls them natural causes and special causes, and when to take action and when not to, and when to notice, how to notice if something is out of place or it's just part of the natural ebb and flow of systems. And so anyway, this is sort of a natural, one of those causes. And so we fixed it and we implemented we created a better system for everybody based on that one incident we learned from. Okay. So this is an example of management not blaming the workers, but looking at what happened in an incident with the workers and seeing, how could we do this better so that everybody benefits? How could we do it better so that the entire system is improved? Okay. So this is just an actual example. And I said I had two examples. One was actual, one was theoretical. So think of your organization, wherever you're working. If you're a manager, think about how you interact with, train, discipline, think of, and the attitude that you have towards workers when they make mistakes. And think of what your bosses do when you make a mistake. If you're not a manager, you don't manage anybody, and you're just a worker, think of all the instances in your life and in work where you made a mistake, not purposely, but you made a mistake. And how did management treat you? How did management encounter, how did they react to that incident? And I think, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, we'll see that it's punitive, that it's, you get sort of, a warning, or might get suspended, or you might get trained, but that's just another fancy word for you got disciplined, and it doesn't really help anything. And maybe as a worker, you got very frustrated, and people get frustrated. Nobody likes working in situations like this in which they think, man, I'm working in the system that was created when I was here, and yet when I make a mistake in the system, people blame me for it. It's really not my fault. And it really isn't. So let me give you this theoretical example of what happens typically in companies, okay? So what happens is, let's say you work in a building and there are machines, and the machines require grease, oil, and there's oil in the machines, and so to make them run smoother. And so one day, a manager's walking by down the factory floor, down whatever it is, and they find some grease on the floor. And so they say, hey, why is there grease on the floor? I almost slipped. And so they call the closest worker, hey, why is there grease on the floor? Oh, sorry, boss. And they come in and they wipe it up, okay? And so the next day the manager comes around, there's grease on the floor again. And so the manager says, hey, calls the nearest worker again. I thought we talked about this yesterday. Why is there grease on the floor? And so, oh, sorry, boss. Oh, man, I don't know what happened. They wipe it up again. Third time, this happens again. And the third day, the manager's now getting a little frustrated, getting annoyed. It's like, look, are you putting this grease on here on purpose? I mean, why is this grease on there? We already talked about this. Why is there grease on the floor again? I'm going to write you up this time. Okay, this is like a safety hazard here. And so he's writing up, and he's getting like, he's embarrassed now, and he's sort of like, oh, I'm getting written up, I'm getting in trouble, I better. And so he wipes it up, and then every day now he's concerned and worried that there's going to be grease on the floor. So now when he comes to work, instead of focusing on his work, he's now focused on his grease on the floor. Every time there's a little drip of grease on the floor, he goes and wipes it so the manager never sees it, so he never gets written up again. This is very, very typical traditional management, okay? And this is absolutely not an effective way to manage, okay? So here is what should have been done. If this had happened in Genie or at Toyota or some of these companies who understand systems, they would have looked at that and said, wow, there's grease on the floor. It could be a safety hazard. Somebody can slip. So could you please wipe it up? In fact, they wouldn't even go to the worker. The worker is busy doing the work. They wouldn't pull them from their jobs to clean this up, because job specifications in companies that are highly productive and highly efficient, there's no time for that person to come over and wipe that up. They would probably get some other person to do that. But, wipe it up, they would. And they would wipe it up. And then here's what they would do. they would try to get to the root cause of it. Well, why was there grease on the floor? Where did it come from? Oh, it came from this machine. Well, where from this machine did it come from? Or they're looking at, oh, it came from this little, there's like, there's a little part right there and it's a little bit loose. And so it's dripping, very slowly, but it's dripping grease on the floor. Okay, well, why is that loose? Well, because this machine has been running for a while and, over time, because of the vibration and so forth, it gets loose. But, periodically, if we would tighten that, because it's a natural thing to become loose, but if we tighten that every, so often regularly, then it wouldn't happen, but it happens. And so, when this happens, we know that it leaks, and so we got to tighten it. But the manager would say, well, but that's after the fact. How can we prevent it in the first place? And so they would say, well, it'd be great to have some kind of a regular preventative maintenance schedule. And so, well, why do we not have that kind of maintenance schedule? Well, I've been working here 15 years, boss, and I never just, nobody ever said anything about that. We just don't have anything like that. So the next time, or that day, probably that day, this manager would go to the executives or go to the higher ups and say, hey, we had this grease on the floor and it was a safety hazard. And I learned that the root cause was, now, here's the difference. The root cause is not the worker didn't pick it up. As soon as they saw a drop of grease, they didn't wipe it. That's not the root cause. That's just a symptom. So what was the root cause? Well, the root cause was there's a loose bolt. The part right there was loose, and that's why it was leaking. That is not the root cause. Well, what is the root cause? The real root cause is we don't have a preventative maintenance plan, system, schedule in our company. That is the root cause. And unless we fix that, that's always going to leak. It's not just that one. There are hundreds of other machines and machinery and things in the system, and those things are going to leak too. Now, I want you to think of, you might say, well, I don't work in a factory. I don't work with machines and stuff. But you understand, there's a metaphor. It doesn't have to be machines. It doesn't have to be grease. Any mistake, anything that stems from or is caused from something else, the point is that the root cause, even when people think they found the root cause, that's not really the root cause. It's much deeper than people think. And so this manager would go and say and talk to them and say, we need a overall system-wide, company-wide, plant-wide preventative maintenance schedule for all of our machines. And so we need to identify when and where and what and who and how, and we need to identify all of those things and we need to set it in place. So we start making that, and within a week we have it down and everybody gets trained, and that doesn't happen anymore. We don't have grease. Now, if in real life, if you went to a Lexus plant, if you went to a Hyundai plant, if you went to a Toyota plant, some of the world-class top, quality and very highly efficient and productive companies in the world, even when you go into the factory, when you go to the factory, they're clean. They're like, wow, has anybody worked here? Did you guys just open up like last week? No, they've been open for 20 years, but it's clean. The bathrooms are clean, the floors are clean, everything's swept, everything's organized, everything's labeled. There's no just garbage. It's clean because the system that management has created an environment, a system where all the workers, their expectations are very clear on what they need to do. And this is the result of the system. Not because some workers in this area are really good, those workers over there are not very organized. It's not, the entire system is like that. You see, when you're making a product, it's not very important. Well, this part of the company is really good, but this part is full of lazy people. These people are very organized. Over there, they're disorganized. Well, then the whole company gets hurt. Okay, in a company, in order to have high quality goods and services, the entire system has to be highly efficient and focused on quality, and has a system in place that can produce that high quality product or service. And this is the sort of the misunderstanding that so many managers have in so many organizations. So when I used to do consulting and I used to go in, I'd talk to managers about these kinds of things, and I get so frustrated that they always blame the workers. It's always, man, if I just had better people. You know how many times I've heard this in my career? Man, if we just have more people, okay? If we just have better people, we just have better trained people. What they don't understand is most of the problems in a company, in a system, are caused by management. They're the ones who create the systems. You have to create a better system and train your employees within that system, and so that they can work and they can create better quality goods and services. And if you just leave it up to them and I hope I get a good person this time, I hope I hire a good person, you can hire a quote average person and train them to be highly specialized and highly skilled. Okay. But you have to create a system. You have to create that system and have the workers come into that system. And so in that theoretical example, going back to that, if you create that kind of thing, if you create a preventative maintenance system, the problem goes away. In both cases, in both examples that I gave you, in systems that really do this right, managers really understand what high quality is, what efficiency is, and what true productivity is. By the way, productivity is not just people working hard. Okay, this is what I've heard this hundreds of times when I was a consultant and engineer. Oh, people work really hard, man. Most of my people work overtime. Okay, that doesn't mean they're productive. And again, this is another topic for another video. But productivity is not necessarily working hard. All right. But so in a system that is highly efficient and managers who understand how systems really work, they take one incident and they use that to learn from it and implement a better system overall. And if you continue doing that, Deming called it the plan, do, check, act cycle. Plan, do, check, act. Now, when this got taught to the Japanese and primarily Toyota, people, you hear Toyota a lot when you're in this kind of, when you're talking about these kind of things, because for so many years, Toyota has been the best at this. They've been the most efficient, the highest quality, the most productive, and just they were the best at it, and pretty much still are. I think there are a lot of companies that have caught up now, and Toyota is not what it used to be back when Taiichi Ohno was there, but it is still one of the best in the world. They have one of the best production systems in the world. And so, but companies that understand this, they understand that the system that they create and this whole, as I said, plan, do, check, act that Deming created, that the Japanese sort of adopted that, and they call it Kaizen, which is the Japanese word for continuous improvement. And so when Deming taught the Japanese, and then the Americans learned from the Japanese because Toyota got so good, and then in the 1990s, James Womack and his colleagues at MIT wrote a book called The Machine That Changed the World, and it primarily focused on why Toyota and the other Japanese companies, but primarily Toyota, why was it so heads and shoulders above other companies in terms of quality and productivity and efficiency. And they coined this term lean manufacturing, because they did more with less. And so they coined the term lean. And as more and more companies in America began to learn about the Kaizen, it was translated and now used in America a lot, and we call it continuous improvement. But a lot of people still use the Japanese word Kaizen. But so this is what has happened. And the reason I really want to make this video, and I think I'll probably make a lot more, because this is so deep and profound, is that this kind of thinking is so it applies. It is applicable is the word I'm looking for. This thinking is applicable to so many different things in life, and yet people think it's only for that specific thing. Think about it in the place that you work. What is a mindset of managers? What is a mindset of workers? Think about it in families. In families, parents create the environment. They create the system. The children are born into that system. And yet when they don't perform, and when I say perform, I don't necessarily mean in academics or things like that, but when they don't meet expectations, shall we say, when they make mistakes, when there's an incident, how many times as parents, and I'm guilty of this as well, have we blamed the kids? Now, of course, people, as they grow up, and kids as they grow up, they have to bear responsibility and so forth, but probably we blame them for things that we should not have blamed them for, because they were born into a system, like just, a lot of times, sometimes parents complain, why are you so impatient? And then they forget how impatient they are, and so they were born into the world like that. They were born impatient, just like the dad or just like the mom. And so you can't blame them for being impatient. They were born like that. I mean, but in so many aspects of life, in your own business, if you're an entrepreneur or a business owner, how do you treat your workers? How do you think of systems? How do you see yourself if you're the owner or the manager? And what is your responsibility in creating the system? It is your responsibility as managers and executives and owners. It is your responsibility to create a system that works well, that continually learns, continually improves, and it is your responsibility to train the workers well, to make sure that they have the tools that they need to do the things that they need to do. And if you don't do that, and when there's an incident and you only blame the workers, your business is probably going to go downhill, okay? I think, again, this is one of the big reasons why companies do go downhill. There are many reasons, but this is one of them. So I just wanted to communicate that today. It's something I feel very passionate about, very strongly about, and I hope it all made sense. I hope that you learned something from it, but I guess that would be my advice for life for today. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.